Welcome to the Building Spirit-Filled Homes podcast by Red Mountain Community Church. This podcast exists to help us engage with a variety of topics through a biblical lens. It is our prayer that we'll take all that we learn from these conversations and apply them to our lives so that we can make a kingdom impact on those around us, starting in our home. Thanks for joining us for our conversation today. All right. Well, welcome to Building Spirit-Filled Homes. I'm Pastor Dave at Red Mountain Community Church, and today we have our special guest, Majo Birdsall from Stories Counseling, and today's topic is going to be on miscarriage and infertility and how we navigate that as the church body and how we can better care for one another, understand one another, and what the Bible says about that. So thanks for joining with us. Majo, thank you so much for joining us today. You're one of our biblical counseling partners, and we're so grateful for that. And today we have just an important topic to talk about as we're building spirit-filled homes. How do we understand the idea of miscarriage, and how do we navigate that well as a church body, as individuals, as couples, as friends? And so I just want to open the floor to you and just allow you to share some of your experience and anything you'd like to share that could help just equip the body to be better at navigating this space.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and just be able to, just answer questions. I think just kind of like some of the common questions that people have and share some knowledge, and I think based on things that I've seen in my office, but also just personal experience. So I'm excited to share more about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, great.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges that you see when a woman or a couple is going through miscarriage or even infertility, right?
Yeah.
They can both sometimes go hand in hand.
Yeah. I think that it tends to be an awkward conversation to have because we don't really know what to say, how to say things, or even when to say things. So I think for the couple going through it, sharing this requires a lot of vulnerability because a lot of times there's really no definite answers as to why these things are happening.
Sure.
And there's a lot of grief surrounding this. And I think that's the problem. I think it's the grief. It stays there and it's painful and it's a mix of emotions. It's not just, okay, I'm feeling sad about this, but there's also maybe some anger, some frustration and doubt. Right? So there's a lot of emotions happening at the same time. So even how to communicate that can be so hard if we don't even know what we're feeling.
Sure.
Right? So I think just especially for, let's say, miscarriage, right? Asking about how someone is doing. I think there's the fear of I'm going to make you sad or I'm going to make you think about it. And I'm like, well, actually, I'm already sad. So you asking about it is not going to make me feel more sad about this. Right? So I think it's just breaking that barrier of this is going to be awkward. And I'm like, yeah, probably.
So you would encourage people, because the individuals or the couple's already sad, you can't make it worse. So actually the worst thing to do would be to do nothing. Exactly. So one of the ways we can provide care is actually stepping into that space and saying, hey, how are you doing? And I'm here, to listen.
Yes. And I think what you just said, I'm here, that goes a long way. Just I don't know what to say. I think sometimes it's better to say that, hey, I don't know what to say right now, but I'm here for you. That actually goes a long way instead of, I feel I hear a lot of times you go through a miscarriage and then people are like, well, at least you can get pregnant, or, well, when are you going to start trying again? And it's just well, let's just go through the grief first. I'm I don't know if I'm ready to go there.
Sure.
Right? So it would be better to just be hey, I don't know what to say.
Instead of trying to fill that space with all those kind of platitudes that we think are actually helping. And we're like, oh, it's kind of like
Yeah.
Job's friends. Like they were great until they started
Yes.
talking. Like just the
Yeah.
presence, it sounds like, is
Yeah.
a big piece of that. And just saying, hey,
Absolutely.
I want to be here to walk with you through that, whatever that
Yeah.
looks like.
Yeah.
Can be a
And
huge
like I
piece.
said, because the grief is not only, let's say, whether that is like miscarriage or infertility, you have dreams,
Mm,
right, about this family that you're
Sure.
trying to start. And with infertility, it's just like, okay, the dream is not happening, right? Things are not happening. So there could
Right.
be even kind of like, okay, well, now I'm upset at my body because it's not doing what it's supposed to be
Mm.
doing, right? Or the dream that I'm like hoping for is not coming to pass. So now I'm grieving the fact that that might not
Mm.
ever happen.
Sure.
And then with the miscarriage is celebrating the fact that, okay, you're pregnant and then there's loss.
Mm.
So you're grieving now like all stages of life at once.
At once.
It's not like, okay, I never got to see, my son or daughter graduate, but it's like, no,
Mhm.
you're actually grieving that right now. You're grieving the
Kind of the
pregnancy in itself.
totality of it.
Yes.
Wow.
So I think that's where it's a little bit more kind of like complicated to even understand like what the person is feeling
Sure.
because there's a lot happening at once.
And even that, I think, is helpful as a person to provide care, right? Like as a friend or a pastor.
Yeah.
Like, wow, you're not just handling one thing, you're handling like a dream that's been lost.
Yeah.
And all of the emotions that go with that. So as you've seen people navigate this from a biblical standpoint, are there passages that you find as you're counseling people that can provide comfort? Because we always have to be careful. It's like, hey, let's throw a Bible verse at you to make it better. And it's like, well, I don't know. But like maybe there are just stories in the Bible or passages that you've just seen that have resonated with people because God's word is a source of comfort and he is the ultimate source of comfort. And so it's important to engage in that. So as you merge kind of the worlds of clinical understanding and biblical understanding, how do you walk with people through that?
So, I love the Bible and I love just all the stories that are there, especially I feel like in the Old Testament. I think people are like, that doesn't apply to us. And I'm like, well, actually it does. And infertility didn't start now.
Right.
If we go back and we just see like, okay, like Abraham and Sarah were actually like dealing with this. They couldn't get pregnant. So I do like to point that out to my clients. And I think a lot of times we also forget about the men going through this.
Yeah.
So I think it is important to also point out like, hey, like Abraham was also going through this. It wasn't just Sarah, right? But it is the couple in itself that they're going through it. But the Bible has multiple examples of couples going through this. So I do like to point that out.
Yeah.
Right? Infertility didn't start right now. And it was hard for them. And it didn't go like they thought it was going to go. And then because we're humans, we try to take control and do things our own way. Right? And in the midst of the pain, I think that's normal, right? It's going to happen. But so I do like to, in a way, have something that we can relate to.
Sure. And in a way, it's kind of saying, hey, this isn't outside of God's scope or control or even just awareness. Like he actually has the messy parts of life in the Bible because that's part of life that he's redeeming. And so we do have a place to go to process through, man, what was it like for Abraham and Sarah, going through that with such a strong desire and how we can at times try to take control. And even though we believe in the Lord's promises, it's like, well, maybe I'm supposed to do this. And then we can end up causing a ruckus, just out of a desire, right?
Absolutely.
Not with malicious intent, but sometimes other people can get affected by it.
Yeah. And then you see, like Hannah is also going through the same thing. And then I feel like the Shunammite woman, and she's actually just like, okay, don't deceive me. I know, like she's trying to have a kid. She can't get pregnant. It's like, don't deceive me. And it's like, I'm not deceiving you. So again, there's multiple examples.
And what Rachel and Leah too, I think they kind of had their back and forth, and like you see the Lord caring, and then even as I think it's Isaac is trying to care for them in that, and like, but I love how you brought up the idea of the husband is also
Yeah.
going through something. And
Yeah.
I think probably far too often we don't kind of recognize that.
Yeah.
And so how do we give space for their pain, for their
Absolutely.
wrestle and understanding too?
Which is going to be different.
Sure.
Right, than what women go through.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they're not experiencing that pain. Right. So again, relatable stories. But then I think when it comes to just like miscarriage, there's been actually one passage that, at least for me, has been like really, really helpful. And I love songs. So I think for me, like worship songs are usually like the way that I find like God speaking into those areas. And Psalm 126.
Okay.
And there's actually like in a specific song, and it's called Shouts of Joy. But there is a part in Psalm 126, especially like verses 5 and 6. It says, "Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them." And that is just one verse that has been like, hey, actually, like the tears that you shed, right? Whenever you go to God, like there's actually power in it, in just being vulnerable and like bringing it all to Him and just being honest. Like, God, I'm devastated. Like, I don't understand why this is happening.
Sure.
But there is this type, I think sometimes we're like also like, well, joy, and you're supposed to be happy. And I'm like, well, actually, it's not that type of joy. This type of joy is coming from a place of like, I'm going through this very painful experience and I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to cry and sit here, like at your feet and like do something about it. Because like, I don't have the strength to do it.
Which I love, that reminder of how the Psalms invite us into that practice, right? So it's not that because we're Christians, God's just going to make everything better. It's no, He invites us into a deeper, really lament of turning to the Lord, crying out, petitioning Him, saying, why? Like, how long, oh Lord? Or why is this happening? Or I'm overcome with grief. And yet He gives us language, even within His Word, to process that. And then there's just this understanding of, even if I don't totally get it, it doesn't change who you are, God. And I can thank You for letting me come to You. Thank You for hearing my cry. And I trust You in the midst of this turmoil or pain. Yeah.
So yes, I think, like you were saying, Psalms is a great place. I think there's so many emotions there too.
Yeah.
But I'm like, they're there for a reason. Right. So the being vulnerable with God, I think, is very important in this process.
I love it.
The more we keep it to ourselves, the heavier it becomes. Right? And it's really hard to, I think, even like trust or do anything about it whenever we're like, because it becomes like this burden that we carry and we don't share with anyone. And that can turn in this heaviness, turn into like a deep depression or anger and bitterness. Right? So coming to God and being vulnerable. I'm always like, God already knows what you're thinking, so might as well just be like,
right,
let it all out.
Yeah, it's not a mystery, right? It's not like, oh, He doesn't understand. But I love how you're saying we have to be careful that we don't become isolated in our pain, that our burden isn't meant to be carried alone. One, the Lord is with us in it, but two, we have to engage in community, because otherwise depression can become a very big stronghold and enslavement to us, because we're caught in our own emotions and thoughts without anybody being able to speak truth over us. So thanks for that reminder of that. I love that reminder of, we just have to be careful of, isolating ourselves, because what can happen because of that.
And I think as you're mentioning that, I'm also reminded that in the midst of pain, there could be that message of, because then guilt comes into place, right? Because you're like, well, my body is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then who's at fault for this? Right? It's something that I did. It's something that someone else did, right? So you start to ask all these questions, and we can start to open a door for the lies to come in. And it's like, well, now it's me. It is my fault. No one else is going through this.
Wow.
So being in community can actually be just like really helpful. whenever you're
Yeah.
going through this, whether it is like miscarriage or infertility, because you start to realize, okay, I'm not the only one going through this. I mean, I cannot tell you the amount of people, and again, just like personally, like I have gone through a miscarriage, and it was devastating. But when I started to share, there were so many women in my church community, like in my even my group of friends, that we hadn't even talked about this. And it's just like, oh yeah, I went through it. And then just like even like older women, like they're like, oh yeah, 15, 20 years ago, like 30 plus years ago, I went through it, and still seeing the emotion that is there. And them just sharing, like, you know what, like the pain is never going to go away because that is your baby.
Yeah.
So it's never going to go away.
Right.
Right. Especially when we're talking about miscarriage. So opening up about this, being able to, and people don't need to say like to know everything.
Sure.
But just for you to share something, just even being like, hey, I'm struggling with this. And then you start to see like, well, you're not alone. Right? Because it's in those places of you're alone that the enemy comes in, and it's like, well,
absolutely,
you probably did something wrong, right? You are the one who's dealing with this and no one else. So opening up to other people, it can be hard.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But when you open up, you start to see there's other people who are going through it. It doesn't make it easier. It doesn't fix the situation. But just to know that you're not the only one, that in itself can be very healing.
Sure. Yeah. Because, you start believing that lie, like, oh, it's only happening to me. So it sounds like some keys: searching the Psalms, kind of for an expression of lament; community, not isolating yourself; being vulnerable in community, actually, and with the Lord can provide space for that.
Yeah.
And as a friend, not being afraid to sit in it with somebody, or some really key things that I think you said today that just really bring much of that out. Is there anything as somebody who has gone through this themselves, or as somebody who cares for others in that you wish you had known before, or like just kind of like that takeaway of, hey, this would really be helpful in the journey, or as you're going through it, or as you're caring for somebody?
Yeah, I would say, like, if you're going through it, honoring your grief. Pain needs to be witnessed.
Okay.
And if no one else is seeing that pain, can you see it? Can you acknowledge how painful this is?
I like that.
You know, so witnessing the pain, honoring your grief, and just knowing that the grief will always be there. I think it's one of the things that we try to get rid of the grief. And I'm like, no, that will stay there. However, it's kind of like, let's say this is grief and this is life right now. And what starts to happen is like the grief stays there, and then there's more capacity for your day to day. So like the grief will not go away.
Yeah.
But your capacity to do your day to day will grow.
Right.
Right. So honoring the grief.
Like that.
And that with honoring the grief comes like sharing your story. If you're not ready to share with others, not only share with the Lord, but share with your spouse. That actually, like, it's something that can bring you together because you're both in pain. So you can witness each other's pain. So share with your spouse.
Okay.
Check in with each other.
Yeah.
I think that's just so important. Again, we forget that men are also going through it.
Sure.
So if you're the wife, I would say, like, check in with your husband. And you don't need to give advice. You just need to listen. And same goes for husbands, right? Yeah. Like, just, you don't need to fix the situation, but just listening and just being there goes a long way as well.
I love that. Honoring the grief.
Yeah.
Not feeling like you have to fix a situation, and making space for one another, because our grief is going to be different at different times. But if we're not aware, then we make assumptions, and that causes a whole huge ruckus. Well, Majo, I'm so grateful that we've just been able to spend a few minutes talking about this, but I'm really excited because in January, you're going to come for 2 nights, 2 Wednesday night workshops, where we're going to get an hour and a half with you for 2 nights in a row, really to invite people into that space. So there's going to be more information about that as we get closer, but I'm excited just to kind of have this as an opportunity, but also a reminder that this is something that we should be engaging in as a community, and it really helps us build spirit-filled homes as we engage in the tougher things together. And as we grow through those challenges and victories, seeking the Lord in one another, and really just providing space to honor grief, to honor one another, and finding hope amidst kind of the storm that isn't so much about being fixed, but it's kind of like, how's the Lord walking with us through it and leading us to a greater restoration and redemption in Himself. So thank you so much for taking the time. I was excited to have this opportunity, and thank you for your vulnerability, and thank you for your expertise, because I really think it's going to bless not only the Red Mountain body, but beyond. So,
well, really, really happy to be here and excited to come in January and just be able to share just more practical like resources and just things to continue working on, and just giving people just more things to I think hold on to.
Awesome.
So thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Yeah.